Good afternoon. An additional condition in order to make a borei pri ha'etz on a fruit is that it must be in its original form. And what that means, the Gemara says that if one made some form of jam out of dates, then they would still recite a borei pri ha'etz because b'milsaihu kaimik kara, because it remains in its initial form. Rashi explains what that means is that it's referring to something which is partially crushed but not entirely crushed, and the Trumas Hadeshen brings that, the Halacha brings that in his Sefer. The Rambam refers to a case also in which one crushes dates with their hands and then consumes it in that manner. One would recite, it would require a borei pri ha'etz, which is the ruling in Shulchan Aruch. The Ramah does quote a yesh omrim, an alternative opinion, that it would actually be a shahakol because perhaps it is no longer in its original form now that it is crushed up. However, writes that b'di'evet, if one recited ha'etz, they would fulfill their obligation. Now the Mishnah Berurah on that Ramah claims that there's a machlokas achronim, whether the Ramah is actually arguing on a case of Shulchan Aruch or if he's referring to a different case where it was crushed entirely. Accordingly, the Mishnah Berurah rules that really there is no nafkamina, no practical difference between the interpretation of the Ramah, because we do hold, like the Shulchan Aruch in this case, that in a situation where it is crushed up, but it still has some of the form remaining, then we would recite a ha'etz or a hadama accordingly. However, in a situation where it is entirely blended, it is entirely crushed up, then that would turn it from a ha'etz into a shahakol. So essentially what the Mishnah Berurah and the Shulchan Aruch are saying is that the Gemara and the halacha that would turn it into a shahakol is only if it loses its form entirely. If it somewhat still maintains an aspect of its form, it's still a little chunky, then it would remain as the initial bracha of either a ha'etz or hadama, but only once it is entirely blended would it become a shahakol. This becomes very relevant in many cases, such as mashed potatoes. It would really depend on the specifics of the mashed potatoes. If they are mashed potatoes from real potatoes, and there are still chunks of those potatoes in the mashed potatoes, one would recite a borei pri hadama. However, if it is very smooth, it is made in a blender, and there are very, very few chunks, and it is really smooth, then that would become a shahakol. Similarly, with applesauce, the same would be true. Is it chunky? Does it maintain some of the form of the apple, or is it entirely smooth? In which case it would be a shahakol. Potato kugel, there are many, many scenarios in which we have to sometimes make a judgment call, but the basic rule of thumb is that if it is smooth entirely and it totally lost its form of the fruit, then it becomes a shahakol. However, if it maintains any of the chunks, any surah, any form of the initial fruit or vegetable, then it would maintain its initial bracha. Have a great day.